Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. And now the Friday Crime Report. Layton, Utah, Friday, May 19th, 2023, 9:45 a.m. Earlier that morning, a resident of Layton had sent a message to their therapist saying, quote, "I think we may have a very real problem. So I uncovered a load of his shady S, and it's really bad, like scary. I think it may be time for legal interference. I know I definitely need to find an attorney, and he's still at the house, so I can't talk." That was the only warning anyone would get. At around 9:45 a.m., the Layton Police Department received a phone call from a man telling them to come to 1832 Gentile Street. He wasn't calling to report a crime so much as to make a confession. He told the police that there were 3 dead people in the house and that he had killed them 20 minutes before he called the cops. He also claimed that there was going to be a murder-suicide. His name was Jeremy Bailey. He also told the police that he had given his firearms to a friend and had the friend store the guns in their garage. And why did he do that? Because he said that he had already been thinking of killing his wife and her parents for a few days. He also said that he had forgotten about a 9mm that he had, which belonged to one of his victims. Around the same time that the killer was calling the police, he also posted a message on Facebook that said, "Massacre suicide. Jeremy Bailey just killed everyone. Becky Stevens, Don Stevens, and 3 of the 4 dogs, 1832 East Gentile Street, Layton." Family members and friends of the people named in the Facebook post began trying to contact them, but it was already too late. When police arrived, Bailey called their dispatch to tell them that he was going to leave the house and surrender. When he was in custody, the police searched the house, and upstairs they found a dead body in each of the 3 rooms. The victims were Bailey's wife, Anastasia Stevens, along with her father, Donald Stevens, and her stepmother, Becky Stevens. They also found 3 of the family dogs killed as well. Police searched Bailey's home and found a handgun, a box of ammunition with cartridges missing, and spent shell casings near each of the victims, including the dogs. Police also searched Bailey's truck. They found a receipt for a purchase of ammunition. He had bought the ammunition at about 9 a.m. that morning, a mere 45 minutes before he called the police. While in a holding cell, the police reported that Bailey said, "I can't believe I did it." He also allegedly said that he would prefer the death penalty to life in prison. Jeremy Bailey's been charged with 3 first-degree felony counts of aggravated murder, which is a capital offense, as well as 3 first-degree counts of felony discharge of a firearm and 3 misdemeanors of aggravated animal cruelty. Astonishingly, he's actually being held without bond. Normally, people with genetic immunity are let go first chance the cops get. This was no crime of passion, however. He said it himself. He had been thinking of committing this mass murder days before he did it. And clearly his victims had been working with people outside the family, like their therapist, to try to find a way to deal with him. The Stevens were staying with Bailey and their daughter, but they lived in Las Vegas. A neighbor said that the Stevens came to town and they would stay with Bailey and his wife for weeks at a time. Police are still trying to find out what the motive was, but neighbors reported that Bailey and his wife were having marital issues, and that was why her parents had come to town. One neighbor said he had seen Bailey and his father-in-law having a heated argument sometime shortly before the killings. One of the neighbors, of course, said the typical, "This kind of thing doesn't happen here," except that it does. If you watch my crime reports, you know that it happens in places like Layton, Utah all the time. This isn't the only family massacre that's happened in Utah. Back in January, I told you about Michael Haight, a man who murdered his 5 children, his wife, and mother-in-law before killing himself. On a side note, to show how the dominant society bends over backwards to praise and otherwise whitewash these mass killers, after Michael Haight carried out his ghastly act, an online obituary website actually had the gall to write, "Michael made it a point to spend quality time with each and every one of his children." This so-called obituary also said he enjoyed making memories with the family, and he recently sold his business to allow more flexibility to spend time with his family. All of this written in an obituary about him with apparently no self-awareness whatsoever. They talked about him as if he was just an average Joe who died in a car accident or something, as if he hadn't just coldly taken the lives of 5 children, as if he hadn't also taken the life of his children's mother and their grandmother. They talked about his business instead. Reminds me of the Las Vegas mass shooter. All the stories about him devoted more than a few columns to the business that he owned. That was what all the white media coverage said about the Las Vegas mass shooter. Talking about his businesses and such, you would have hardly known that the guy slaughtered dozens of people if you let the white media tell the story. The dominant society's need to whitewash these suburban psychos is so overwhelming that they have to praise them, or otherwise bend over backwards to try to normalize them. And that includes not reporting the mass slaughters that they commit on a daily basis. Utah is having a mass murder on the order of at least every 6 months, and those are just the ones that are big enough to make the news. But the white media is not talking about them. It goes against their narrative. And speaking of going against the narrative, this latest Utah massacre happened on Friday, May the 19th. 3 people murdered in a town of 83,000 people. Now, at the same time that 3 lives were being snuffed out in Layton, Utah, in Chicago, only 1 person was killed by gun violence that entire 3-day weekend. In Chicago, a city of millions of people. So 3 times as many people were killed in Layton, Ohio in one morning than died in the entire 3-day weekend in the city of Chicago. Oh, Fox News doesn't tell you about this, and neither will the rest of the white media, because they're all working together to prop up and validate a racist anti-black lie. They just go ahead and act as if it's all true and that it's absolutely inarguable. They leave the black media to go ahead and point out the truth. That's why I do these crime reports, and why I hope you make it a point to take notes on this stuff. Police claim that Jeremy Bailey said he would rather get the death penalty, and he most likely will, but the racial fantasy the white media has created by putting an embargo on all the stories about the countless mass killings that occur in places like Layton, Utah, is in large part to blame for this. The people who live in these places don't know that this happens in places like theirs all the time. But the white media wants to prop up the lie of racial exceptionalism for places like Layton, Utah. They want the people there to believe that they're special, certainly better than the black folks in Chicago. So they censor mass killings like the one that Michael Haight committed and Jeremy Bailey. And this is the result. The cocoon that the white media has manufactured may make the rural and suburban areas feel morally superior, but in reality, it's left them sitting ducks for these daily slaughters. They need to hear the truth about the places where they live and about themselves. But fat chance of the white media ever doing that. They're more concerned about saving face than they are about saving lives. They've decided that it's far better to do nothing and leave the victims to hope that a therapist or someone else outside of the useless police departments can help them handle the danger. And that's the perverted irony of all this. While the police and the white media continue to hide their own heads in the sand, these communities are also putting their families and friends in the ground, too. And that's this week's Friday Crime Report. Keep your eyes open and stay on alert, because there's a lot worse criminals out there than the ones the white corporate media chooses to show you. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Jerlene Harris, Ikegas Dorset, Samora Morris, Amir Miller, and Suleiman Alaji. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.